and welcome to this week's Three Legs, Four Wheels F1 podcast. It's Paul here with
Sean,
Chris,
Lee,
and joining us this week, our special guest
is Craig Scarborough.
Thanks a lot for coming on, Craig. It wouldn't be the start of the season without you now. So it's
it's a tradition now, isn't it?
It is.
It's
What is
like
this? The
Christmas dinner and crackers and things.
Fifth year we've done this.
Really? Wow.
something like that. Fourth or fifth, yeah.
Wow, flipping heck. Well, we are in our seventh. Yeah, we've just done 7 years of this show now.
Jesus.
that's quite scary.
Yeah, most of us were young when we started. I'm just letting anyone get a line in on there about my age. No, fair enough.
No, he's fine.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, they've all gone. I've run out.
Yeah, because you've been doing the age jokes that long, yes.
New season, new jokes. Why not?
Why,
I'm
we've
literally too young to think of any more jokes about your age.
Moving swiftly on. Right, so we have a season to look forward to. New cars, some new lineups, new rules, new people behind the scenes, and, well, same old from us, really. First thing is, there was actually some Monday news tonight, and Imola is now on the calendar until 2025. Which, personally, I think it's great. Love the circuit.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, actually. I've been going through sort of my archive over the winter, and it's like you actually realise that it used to be the first European race was San Marino. And it's like, oh, God, yeah. I mean, we've got used to it being Spain now for so many years. And I think this year, if I can remember the calendar correctly, it's kind of gone back to its original place. And I think the calendar's all better for it. I think it's great that we're going to be going back there for some time to come. So I'm going to have to try and wrangle a pass and get out there one year.
Good idea.
Yeah, if we could get transport off the island, we'd join you.
But yeah, I think it's been good since it's come back, hasn't it, Imola? It's been a couple of good races.
Yeah. No, but it's good to see it back. It looks like F1 are moving away from the we only want one race per country, and they can't really say it with now 2 US Grand Prix on the calendar this year, and potentially the third as well, because there's talk of Las Vegas. Don't know what anyone thinks to
where
that.
did that go? That's not on the calendar at the moment, is it? I don't know if that one's still a live opportunity, is it?
Yeah, apparently it is. I mean, Miami's obviously confirmed for this year. And in typical Florida style, they're building a beach club between 2 of the corners.
Classic.
But yeah, there's talk of a Vegas race, not necessarily a street circuit. Could be something on the Vegas Motor Speedway, which I was watching the NASCAR on last night for about 10 minutes, and I got bored of seeing yellow flags. So it could be something sort of Indy style with bits of the oval and a road course in the middle, possibly. Which I like the way that they did it at Indy. Don't know what everybody else thinks about that.
That's not going to be a quick fix, though, is it? That's not going to be something that they can sort of knock up for next year, I would imagine. That'll be to get it sort of ready and FIA sign off. That'll be a job.
Throw enough money at it and do it quick enough. I mean, don't forget, last time the race in Las Vegas was in a car park.
This is true.
Yes,
yeah.
Indeed it was. And I think, in Las Vegas, I mean, it needs to be in Las Vegas, doesn't it? I mean, that was always the disappointment with the Valencia Grand Prix, that it was out at the port and no one could sort of see Valencia in the background. I mean, I think if they put like a glass tunnel through a casino or something, had the cars flying through like they have at some of the Formula E races, I think Berlin and London both had a kind of a notional indoor section. I think that would be stunning, and I think that would really kind of, grab people's attention. So, why not? Let's have a car park, casino, what have you, race rather than something out on a circuit.
I'm just trying to work out how they do that. Then again, it's Las Vegas. Money is no object.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who's left their phone on?
That was me. That was me.
Paul.
I'm out of practice. We haven't done a show for 3 weeks. So the new season is upon us. Testing, not Shakedown, starts this week, and we'll actually get to see all the cars sort of in the flesh, as it were. And well, they look different from last year, and as we were saying before we started recording, they actually look different to how they were all revealed to us over the last few weeks.
They have, and I think one of the great things is after that kind of slightly odd concept launch back at Silverstone last year, everyone has been saying since, well, it's a spec series, all the cars are going to look the same, Formula One is dead. And I was sort of saying, no, there's loads of things they can do. There's loads of things they can do with these cars. And bang, we've got 10 very different cars, and it's very hard to kind of put them into any kind of grouping as to, well, them two are very similar. Even though the Red Bull and the AlphaTauri or the Haas and the Ferrari, they're all totally different. And I think Formula One's so much better for it. It's everyone's got a different concept and a different way of thinking about how to exploit these rules. And it certainly has worked.
Yeah, I mean, starting from the front and working backwards, there's a lot of variety just in the front wing shapes with the way that they're going for different aero concepts. And
exactly, yeah.
And then the what is going on the side of the Red Bull car, because there is a hell of a lot where the turning vanes used to be.
Yes, there's a little area they've kind of created to feed the underfloor, and they've given you the one that looks like a barge board that sort of sticks out the side. That's in the rules is called a floor edge wing, which I guess is what FEW? Few? No, that doesn't sound very good, does it? And then you've got fences inside that section as well, and the teams have got quite a lot of scope to play with the size and the shape of that area, and they're all very different, and they're all quite hard to see. Which is interesting. So I think that's going to be one of those kind of spy moments, getting the right photography over the test and the first races, just to exactly understand what's going on in that area, because it's not what you would expect. And I know there was some pictures from the German website AMUS, which had the AlphaTauri up on a crane and got the photos underneath that area. And it's another area where everyone's quite different. There's a couple of little loopholes people have found there. Williams and Red Bull have both found them. I think Haas found the same one as Williams as well. So, then you've got like the side pods are very different. The roll hoops are very different. Really, it's only the rear wing at the moment that looks fairly consistent from car to car. But I think that will vary as the teams start playing about with wing levels rather than just kind of focusing on Bahrain, which would be obviously the big test and the first race.
And of course, we'll get to see an approximation of what's going to be racing at Bahrain this week. But there's no guarantees that the cars that we'll see out on track in testing will be the ones that actually end up on the grid.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a handful of teams that will have substantial updates. I think Mercedes being the kind of the leader amongst them. The car that they did the shakedown with was very much a kind of, I mean, I've been describing it as a W12, W13 or 12 and a half or something. It's like they've got the structure and the mechanics of the W13, but it looks like the radiators and the side pod concept was very much grafted on from the previous car. So maybe they're keeping their powder dry there, and they're going to have something, quite different in the sort of the side pod and the floor area, which would make lots of sense, because that's really where at the moment where a lot of the opportunities are. I wouldn't expect the nose to change necessarily, but you never know. But Mercedes definitely going to be one of the ones to change. But equally, I think this is going to be a year of high development. So, the sort of general concept that you'll see on some cars at the beginning of the year will evolve into something quite different by the time we get through to the final race in 23 races time, which is still quite kind of hard to fathom as someone that kind of has to work every Grand Prix weekend. It's a very long season.
Well, 23 races if they drop in the replacement for the now cancelled Russian Grand Prix, of course.
That's true.
Portugal's looking
I thought Turkey was the hot rumour.
Oh, we're looking at different websites.
Obviously.
Singapore also tweeted something today, didn't they? They retweeted the article about the needing another Grand Prix, and the Singapore circuit retweeted that, saying that Malaysia.
Oh, Malaysia.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
The Sepang circuit.
I missed Sepang.
Yeah, I mean that's a great circuit. Produces great racing, looks fantastic. It's great to be there as well. I'm lucky enough to have been there just the once. I'd love to see Sepang back on the calendar, and with Petronas, still heavily involved with Mercedes, you could see how that could be organised. Obviously, I don't know. Obviously, the finer details of the politics and the commercial side of it, but if they're asking for votes, it would get my vote to come back on the calendar.
Yeah, that one didn't occur to me. Also, it's fully lit, so they could have it as a night race.
Ooh, night Sepang.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yes, yeah,
That'd be
that was
cool.
another thing that I think I read about during the week as well. So I don't know. I mean, I know the time difference would be handy, and night races can be quite exciting. But I think because it is such a, the architecture of the grandstands with those sort of hairpins going around the palm-like ends of the stands. I think it would still work much better in the daytime. But if we have to go there at night, then that's fine by me as well.
Doing it at night time would take out the unfortunate event of all the water in the world falling out of the sky during the race, though.
Does it not rain at night in Malaysia?
The case having been there in the nighttime storm.
No, it kind of rains at the same
season,
time,
isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of rains at the same time every day.
Ah.
Every day when the humidity gets to a certain point, it just all falls out of the sky because that's all it can take.
There we go.
It's that the year that they, I think it was the year Button won with half points.
So the ice cream race.
Yeah, they changed the time, and because my friend used to live out there, and he was saying like all the sort of local weather guys were saying like this is a fucking disaster waiting to happen moving the race, and yeah, the disaster happened.
Oh, by the way, Jensen Button is now friend of the podcast because regular listener and our sim racing correspondent Matt Steele is now going karting with him on a weekly
nice.
basis.
Cool.
There we go.
I'll
Should probably find someone a bit slower, really.
Matt won his class. I don't think he was as fast as Jensen.
Craig, you were mentioning rules and legality a minute ago. Is there any rumbling of anything like a protest or anything that's kind of raised any eyebrows at this point as like, oh, that's a bit not necessarily within the letter of the law?
No, I've not heard any rumblings. Obviously, I've been, I keep my eye very close to these things, and there's a handful of things that will come up. I think bodywork flexibility is almost definitely going to be a big story again this year, I have to say. And it's going to be the floor edges will be one of the sort of the key things, which I think teams will start to complain about. Trouble is, it's very hard to get it with the onboard camera, so it needs to be trackside photography, which can be hard to analyze accurately between teams. But yeah, I think there's a few bits and pieces. I think how some of the teams are going to manage the brakes and the brake cooling with respect to managing the tire temperatures. I think that is something that's a bit of a blind spot within the regulations. And there's also just a few sort of like geometry things, which kind of, I don't think will probably bubble up, but I think there's a few interpretations where a few other teams are going to go, but you can't put that there. And it's like, well,
yeah,
we've asked the FIA and they've said yes, and we're going to run it. So yeah, so I think it will be a year of technical controversy, definitely. And as much as there was a brief moment of love breaking out between, it's not the best way of describing it, peace breaking out between a couple of the top team principals over the winter, that seems to have been quite sharply forgotten almost immediately going into the last week. So, I think we could still be in for quite a lot of backbiting this year with legality and how teams are going about doing technical things with the cars. So, yeah, that should keep me nice and busy.
Should do. A friend of a friend who works within a Formula One team said that when Red Bull took their car under the covers, out of its covers on the first day of the shakedown, because it was definitely not a test. A lot of people had, were a lot of other teams furrowed brows and raised eyebrows apparently at what Red Bull did with their side pod, moving that air inlet further back. Although on further inspection, it looks like that's not actually that important.
No, I mean, I think we're, at this time of the year, particularly for these regulations, side pods are a very visual thing that we're all going to be looking at and comparing. And there is almost definitely a better solution amongst them, maybe a couple that, end up being very similar. But I don't think the side pod is going to be like the Brawn double diffuser moment. It's not something that's kind of a primary performance factor on these cars, but it's something that needs to get sorted out. And we'll contrast them. I mean, the Red Bull side pod inlet, I that was one of the obvious solutions for me looking at the regulations that you would kind of, form something a bit like a barge board with some of the surface to create the undercut, have the inlet further back. But the new regulations open lots of opportunities to allow you to play with the shape of the side pods, and equally the function of the side pods in terms of not just cooling the engine, but also in terms of the undercut, working the floor edge with the slope of the side pod, working the diffuser, and equally just the bulk of the side pod, reducing drag. And I think that's one of the other big things that's maybe surprised me coming out of the side pods this year. So if you think back, for as long as most of us probably can remember, certainly some of the younger members that are involved in this podcast today, not less oldies, skinny the side pods, the better the race car has always been the kind of the go-to reference.
Yeah,
but that's not necessarily the case, because under the previous regulations, the teams were trying to create as much downforce as they could, and if it meant creating lots of drag, then the downforce wins out, which need more and more downforce. Dirty downforce was the term that the teams tend to use, or inefficient was probably more likely what the aerodynamicists would say. And that was great. And that's skinny side pods really work for that. But now it looks on the face of it that a lot of the teams are trying to create as low a drag car as possible to kind of complement the underfloor tunnels, which produce much less drag, but lots of downforce. And, you see someone like the Haas or the Ferrari in particular really go in this low drag route. And bigger side pods can give you downforce, but equally big side pods can reduce drag because they slightly shadow and shape the airflow by the rear wheels, which are a big source of the drag in an open wheeler race car. So, I think we've got to kind of reset our brains a little bit. Everyone was kind of pointing at the McLaren and the Ferrari going, oh, that car's too bulky. They're going to have to change that. And it's like, no, maybe they won't. And then you go and look at something like the Williams and you think, that looks really exciting. And I mean, I think it's the most radical car out there. But is that the right solution for this year? Is that all going to add up? So, there is some scope to get some performance out of side pods, but equally, I think there's the biggest danger is actually you can lose out a lot with the side pod. So I think it's going to be something that we'll be talking a lot about through the year as teams play about with the shape of the bodywork.
I mean, one thing that the teams will have had to have done with certainly the aero around the side of the car is adapt to the new 18-inch wheels, and to me, that looks like it's a bit of a change that's been sort of forced on the whole aero design philosophy around the sides, and trying to sort of mitigate the changes in airflow. Is it going to be one of these years where some teams will get it right and some teams will just have to play catch up all season with that, or do you think most of the teams have got that taken into consideration?
I mean, I would say, given the variety of designs that we've got out there, although the shakedown at Barcelona wasn't very conclusive, I don't think anyone has got it drastically wrong at the moment. But I think there will be a spread of the good and the bad cars, and at the moment it's following a very similar pattern to the championship standings for the past few years, with a bit of shuffling, within one or two positions for everyone. In respect to the aero around these new wheels and tyres, in some respects, the great thing about these regulations is that they've been thought through by engineers, aerodynamicists, chassis designers. And while it will have a big impact, a lot of the things that they've done with the design of the cars, the wheels and the tyres kind of look after themselves aerodynamically, because you've got these big deflectors over the top of the front tyres, and what you can't really see is a really clever deflector lower down on the inside of the front tyres, front brake duct area. And a lot of those swirly patterns that everyone got very excited about in the rain on the latter days of Barcelona, that is partly these deflectors doing their job to direct the tyre wake to the back of the car. The teams will always want to try and get that out of the way, but there's a limit to what you can do with these regulations. So, it's one of those things that I think the teams are going to very quickly reach the limit of what they can do in terms of managing the tyre wake, and then they're just going to have to live with it and get other areas of the car to work. But generally, I think what the FIA have enforced with that sort of tyre bodywork, the wheel covers, what have you, is probably what a lot of the teams would have gone for, given the objectives anyway. So, there's a limit to what you can play about with there. So it will be interesting to see if anyone comes up with anything really clever in those limited areas they can play about with those things. But I think by and large, it's a case of, that's what you've got, deal with it.
Was that my phone again, or was that somebody else's?
It was
phone?
someone's phone. It wasn't my phone.
Somebody's phone just went off. I don't know. Can't have been mine. What else was I going to say? Oh yes, porpoising. Now that was something that was discussed quite a bit during the shakedown. Something that we've not seen for a few years. In fact, the last time I remember it getting mentioned was by Eddie Jordan when he was describing how woefully bad the HRT car was.
Porpoising is something that's always been present in the higher end downforce eras of Formula One, which typically means that it kind of started around the ground effect era in the late 70s, early 80s. But certainly until the mid 90s, when they sorted out the underfloor aero with the plank and the step and the limited sizes of diffusers and the height of the front wing, a lot of that went away because it was the rules were literally trying to get rid of part of that effect. And it's what's been quite interesting, again, being a bit of an oldie, remembering it from the oldie days, that a lot of people are simply unaware of it and weren't really aware of what was causing it and what was going on. And that's been quite interesting because Formula One's fan base has changed quite dramatically over the past few years. And you can call it the Drive to Survive effect or what have you, but certainly there's a lot of people that don't know of previous eras of Formula One, the technology and the problems. But porpoising is quite simply the faster you go in a Formula One car, the more downforce you get, and that squashes everything down to the track. So it squashes the suspension down, it squashes the tyres, it also deflects the bodywork. Hence the reason I was mentioning earlier that I think that's going to be one of the talking points for this year. And there comes a point that something gives up with the aerodynamics under the car, and there's lots of things that it could be. And then you lose your downforce. And without the downforce, everything springs back up. But as soon as you spring back up, the downforce starts getting created again, and it squashes you down. And then you just go up and down, up and down, up and down. As we saw that, rather worrying looking video of Charles Leclerc going down the straight. Again, equally bumps can have an effect on it. As we've seen at Le Mans, crests in the road as well. If you're behind another car, there's lots of factors. And for me, it was quite surprising that so many teams had issues with this, knowing how good they are in the wind tunnel, how good they are in working out what's going on with suspension, even though the suspension is massively simplified this year. Having said that, I think everyone's got a little bit too excited about porpoising, and I think it's one of those things that we'll see probably a lot less of in the Bahrain test, even less by the time we get to the race. And then really it's just going to be one of those little things that crops up for a team or a number of teams based on the circuit, the tyres, everything else that's kind of going on at the time. I don't think we're going to see teams regularly having problems and large numbers of the teams having problems with it. It's just something that they will work out very quickly. And you could see even in those 3 days of shakedown, teams were adapting the setup of the car, potentially adapting the aero. I think a lot of people were pointing at changes that were on the car and immediately assuming that was to do with porpoising. I think that was actually just more to do with the planned aero updates anyway, particularly at the back edge of the floor. So I think this is something that will, be a little bit of a hype for a while, if that fact it already has, and will die down very rapidly.
That does explain it. Oh, Chris, you've just rejoined us again, twice. We're having great technical fun tonight.
Just carry on. It's not what happened to me. Just carry on.
At least you've come back not giant.
Not yet, anyway.
Give it half an hour. On the subject of Charles Leclerc, he did say that bringing active suspension back would solve a lot of the problems. Where do you stand on that one?
I've got 2 points of view on that, really. First of all, I don't think it's the solution for porpoising because while there is simpler suspension on the cars now, I think simply having active suspension isn't a cure-all for what's going on here, because it's a largely aerodynamic problem, which then dovetails into it then being an out of balance problem with the aero, the suspension, the flexibility of the tires, the flexibility of the bodywork, the shape and the surface of the track. So I don't think active is the kind of the click your fingers, this will sort it. Having said that, I've long since argued for the return of active suspension in Formula One, especially seeing as since we've now got the spec ECU in the cars, which goes all the way back to 2006, I think. It has the self-policing ability within the regulations. And I know it's been a debate that's come and gone with the regulators and teams many times. A lot of the chief designers, technical directors tacitly would like it to come back, but I don't think it's just been high enough on the agenda to actually happen. I would like it to come back. I mean, I think it could be easily policed. It would be a good piece of technology, and in an odd kind of way save the teams a fortune, because the aero side of suspension development since certainly since the end of the active era, but certainly in the last decade or two under the current regulations, the teams have spent a fortune trying to create mechanical and hydromechanical solutions to do things that we could do with a bit of code knocked up in an afternoon. And I'm massively simplifying it for anyone who works on suspension coding. It's very different. It's the same with the steering system as well, which was a discussion I was having on social media at the weekend as well. Because you can now police these things so much better, it would be cheaper, simpler, more flexible to have these things brought into back into the sport. And there's no argument that these could be driver aids, which is one of the reasons that a lot of this technology was banned back in 94 anyway. So partially incorrectly anyway, but definitely I think that there are some technology that could come back in a slightly simplified way. So I'd like to see active back, but not simply as a sticking plaster for porpoising.
That says it all.
Mm.
I've completely lost where I was going to go next. Anybody else got another question? Quick, while I try and regain my train of thought.
Well, we had a quick conversation pre-podcast, didn't we, about renders and how they seem to be further away from the actual cars that we saw in 22 than I can remember in any other year. Because is this just because of the new set of rules, or is this just teams only willing to release renders that are quite old? What's the deal with the renders being so distant from the actual cars that came out on track?
I think there's a few different aspects to it. I think first of all is that the teams are developing in the wind tunnels at a massive rate at this stage, and those renders aren't purely designed to excite fans on launch day. Those renders are designed long in advance in order to show what the car looks like to sponsors, to potential sponsors. Hey, put your sticker here and it will look like this, and this is what our car's going to be like. So those renders have a life beyond those few hours of fame on launch day. But having said that, there is this whole secrecy thing, and some of the teams have been quite ridiculous about it this year in terms of how tight-lipped they've been, and therefore the renders have been slightly older versions, and Haas were very open about that when they unveiled their car with a render quite early. Sometimes they're willfully inaccurate, and we know that the McLaren was. I think the Mercedes render, which was shown during the launch, was inaccurate. Alpine's was definitely hiding aspects of the car which were physically different. The great thing with the render is that you can hide a push rod. I mean, actually thinking about it now, we completely forgot about the Aston Martin, where they'd only rendered one of the front push rods onto the car, which led to a whole debate on social media as to, well, where's the other one? Can they only run with one, or have they got a push rod and a pull rod? Which I created a joke about and was quite excited to find out that some Italians actually repeated that joke, thinking I was serious. But yeah, the renders, it's a slightly convenient thing. The other thing you've got to think about is, if you watched any of the Drive to Survives, or like the fantastic McLaren documentary, which I can't remember what it was called now, Grand Prix Drive or something like that, from a few years ago. Those last weeks of getting that car built are really fraught at the factory. People are working, all day long, all night long, trying to get this car finished. And then you can imagine all the people in the design office, in the manufacturing, all of the people piecing physically the car together, only to have the marketing director walk in and go, right, I'm taking that car away for 2 days now. I'm going to photograph it for a day, and then I'm going to put it in front of all of the press for a day. And they're thinking, we haven't got 2 days to spare. We've got to get this, lorried down to Barcelona or flown off to Bahrain. So having a render, or sadly, as we had this year, was the show car, the F1 show car, being wheeled out in front of the world's press, and Christian Horner or Williams saying, this is our new car. And it's like, that is not your new car. And, I've got no problem with them showing you a livery on a show car, as long as they say what that is. But saying that is the RB18 is at best just disingenuous, because that show car was made in Northampton out of, steel tubes at the back of the car. And while it is actually carbon fiber, it doesn't have brakes, doesn't have an engine, doesn't have gearbox, fuel tank. It's made up from bits and pieces of other race cars and, F1 early concept of bodywork. So, showing that off, I think Alpine did it as well, to be fair, at their launch, is just, to me, it just doesn't make sense. That why would you call something that patently isn't your car? But maybe that's just something I'm being a little bit picky about. But it was an odd year. Not at all. Yeah, for me, it was an odd year to pick apart what to look at and what not to look at, between show cars, renders, hushed up photography that came out to, claiming to be spy photography, but clearly wasn't, because, someone was purposely standing in front of something they didn't want you to see. And it's been tricky, but, the flip side of that is that, we've had a fantastic range of cars and solutions to have a really good look at through the launch season.
I mean, we'll get to see, I'd probably say about 80% of what everything's going to look like come this week in Bahrain.
Yeah.
What should we be looking out for in particular?
Right, okay. Well, we've mentioned a couple of teams that have come with quite big updates, and I think that will be quite obvious. I think what you need to be looking at now, or what I will be looking at now, is looking at some of the details which were obviously simplified on the launch cars. And one of the big things is going to be that inlet to the diffuser with the barge boards, or the floor edge wing and the fences inside, the shapes that they've got there. And then along the floor edge, and again, it was the big story from last year talking about the floor edge, and then no one had really kind of concentrated in it much up until that point. That's going to be an area of big development. And you're going to see lots of slots and little flicks and bits and pieces being put along the edge of the floor. And it's going to be quite hard to kind of pick apart what they're doing. And equally, you're going to have people pointing at changes and saying that's because of porpoising, but it's actually more to do with rear tyre wake and managing the diffuser at the back of the car than necessarily kind of responding to those things. I think the other great thing that we're going to have in this test There'll be a lot more people there with a lot more cameras, and we're going to start to see a lot more under the skin of the cars, which we did get quite a bit from at the Barcelona Shakedown, but maybe it's not as much as I would like. But I don't think there's ever going to be a case where they're going to show as much as I would like. And I think the things that we need to start to be looking at is, how the suspension's laid out, how they're also inside the brake ducts, how they're managing the internals of the brake ducts now, because that's become a lot more complicated this year. Because in previous years, you have the scoop on the front brakes, and that goes in through the brakes and it goes out through the wheel, kind of job done. Now you can only bring the air in through the brake duct scoop into the brakes, and it won't go out through the wheel. In fact, it won't even go out of the brake duct, but it has to kind of all be ducted internally and go back out the far end of the scoop on the inside of the wheel. So we're going to see some very dirty cars in races this year. I mean, that white Haas is going to be looking particularly grubby, I would imagine, come race end. And we've seen Red Bull have done something quite sophisticated in that area, and a couple of other teams have been quite simple. And again, as I alluded to earlier, I think this is an area where teams could be playing about with thermal management of the brakes and the tyres. And it's something that's a bit of a grey area within the regulations. They try to kind of word it out by specifying aspects of these brake ducts, but it will still be something that teams will put a lot of development in. And we haven't seen the half of what's inside those things at this stage.
And, of course, the other thing this year, we've got the engine freeze, which was all done for the benefit of Red Bull and Red Bull powertrains, but now it looks like it wasn't really necessary if Honda are going to be continuing.
I wouldn't agree with that, no. I think what it was is Honda were pulling out. Red Bull clearly needed a power unit, and it wasn't likely that any of their rivals would give them an engine supply. I mean, let's be honest, who would? And then you have the issue of, well, they can't develop an engine in the time available. How can you have one of your championship winning teams without a power unit? So everybody agreed to go with the engine freeze, and that basically allowed Red Bull breathing time to set up Red Bull powertrains, which is more of a business to operate the engines. The engines will still be made by Honda and brought over to the UK, and it will partly be managed in the UK by Honda, but partly by Red Bull powertrains. That arrangement wouldn't have happened if you didn't have the freeze. So the fact that you still see HRC, Honda Race Corporation, which is a MotoGP fan, I think it's great seeing that sticker on a car. It's just one of those arrangements that just works out because that's where everyone else is. Now, you've got to remember the engine regulation changes, and these engines will now be frozen until the end of 2025. And then in 2026, we get this, as yet undisclosed new engine formula, which will be more sustainable. It'll be a bit louder, hopefully a lot cheaper, and will bring in other manufacturers at that point. So that's when Red Bull powertrains will really start to need to get busy. But it also means with this engine freeze is that Mercedes and Ferrari and Renault have now got, and Honda potentially have got time to be looking at these new engine regulations. What would happen if we do have a fully sustainable e-fuel, if we do lose the MGUH, and if we suddenly have a 500 horsepower hybrid system on the cars. You've got to remember, even though these cars are currently 1,000 horsepower, only 160 of that horsepower is actually given by the hybrid system, which seems a really odd imbalance when you can see that, the endurance LMP1 cars were 1,000 horsepower, 500 hybrid, 500 from the combustion engine. I think that's where Formula One wants to be going towards. So the teams, all the engine manufacturers will start to be playing about with what do they need to do for these regulations, while having a degree of parity and a slightly lighter workload over these next handful of seasons with these current power units. So I think it's just one of those things that's worked out quite well for everybody in the end, and not just a weird consequence of Honda wanting to pull out.
Right. I obviously completely mistook the way that it was all all done and put across. But saying that, if they're going down the sort of the similar route to the well, you can't call them LMP ones anymore, the hypercars. Toyota comes back, and all of a sudden, every customer team is clamouring to be the de facto Toyota works team.
Well, yes, but then you've got the German manufacturers coming in as well. I mean, there's lots of rumours about Audi and Porsche and what have you. I think it'd be good that we had, more engine manufacturers in the sport, but in a way that is reasonable for them, and in terms of how much money they need to spend, because that scares them away very, very quickly. And equally, I hate using the word road relevance, because it's almost like a negative term for a lot of people that are into motor racing. But, something has got that kind of social responsibility, that we're not just racing around burning petrol to entertain people, that we are actually doing something, we are considering the environment around us. And, that's definitely that sustainability message, that environmental message is something Formula One is very big to get across, despite the fact that, it is a petrol-based sport. And, nowadays, the world simply doesn't look kindly upon something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember years ago thinking, what will happen to Formula One when petrol is an incredibly rare commodity, and it looks like they're actually gearing up to get away from it being the sort of weapon of choice, I guess, or the main weapon of choice, anyway.
I mean, I think that the strategy they're following at the moment is to go towards a sustainable combustion fuel. Now, I'm completely honest, I'm not entirely clear exactly what that means and how much the figures stack up, because it's sustainable. Great. It means it's renewable. We're not digging up oil in order to power the cars, but equally there are emissions, and there is a cradle to the grave carbon cost for whatever goes into the fuel, as it would be with if it went electric. At the moment, they seem to be trying to keep hold of the combustion engines, certainly through till 2030. But there is a discussion to be had. Is at what point does Formula One potentially go away from the way that it's always done, which is pretty much the only way that any car and vehicle can operate, which is a combustion engine and a gearbox and a differential and drive shaft out to wheels? And do they think about changing that layout? At what point do we think, could we go with battery or with hydrogen or with some kind of wireless powered technology along the straights, like a Skeletrix car sort of thing? And do we maybe keep the engine, but rather than the combustion engine driving the wheels, why doesn't it drive a motor so that everything's more efficient, and you have electric motors driving the wheels at the back of the car? There's lots of different shapes that the car could end up being, and maybe even an equivalency formula, which worked so well in the sort of 80s with the turbo era. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot still to be discussed, and I think at the moment F1 seems to be having some conversations, but it's certainly shying away from having a quite a bold roadmap going in sort of to the 2030s, 40s, and 50s, which it's thinking about. But I think it does need to start to communicate the direction and the ideas that it's having.
At what point do you think that a Formula One team or an engine manufacturer is going to start running on electric power for pit lane entry, for example, on saving fuel, and maybe even running behind the safety car? Because I thought for a small time before we saw 2022 cars that an engine manufacturer might try and go down that route where they're saving minuscule amounts of fuel, but obviously, Formula One's all about fine margins. Using as much of the electric power as possible, not seen in Formula One before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something that was originally going to be part of the concept, I think, of the 2014 regulations, if I remember correctly. Certainly pit lane use under electric. But the way that the cars are mechanically laid out, where the hybrid motor is effectively attached to the crankshaft of the engine, so the only way you can run electric only is still to spin the engine and the pistons under compression, and it's like, well, that's not going to work. So yeah, there would need to be a major regulation change. equally, as much as we think when we see these cars kind of trundling around behind the safety car that they're kind of going like your nan does in her little hatchback, let's remember there's a trained racing driver in a high performance road car at the front of that pack, the safety car driver, who's driving the legs off of that car, yet still the Formula One cars behind are going, he's going too slow. So the Formula One cars are still delivering a huge amount of power and energy when they're behind the safety car, and I don't think the battery that's on board and the paltry 160 horsepower hybrid motor wouldn't really allow you to be behind the safety car for any period on electric only. So, that would need to come as part of the future regulation changes. And I think it should, I think that's all good stuff. I mean, it's really only been in the past year that all of these cars have effectively been able to self-start themselves with the MGUK, which is the hybrid motor attached to the engine. And I think Ferrari and I think it was Renault were probably the first two teams to be able to actually start the car, because the MGUK is, to all intents and purposes, a 160 horsepower starter motor with a whacking great big battery in front of it at 900,000 volts. So not 900,000, 900 to 1,000, should I say. And Mercedes were the last team to actually be able to self-start their car. And what I understand now is that certainly most of the other teams, apart from Mercedes, actually start the car in the garage now under the hybrid system without putting the starter shaft in at the back of the car, which is, an oddly small piece of progress, but something that you think, why is it taking so long? Why isn't that in the regulations? Equally with the reverse gear, these cars, for the small amount of times that they would need to reverse, it would probably be better to do it with the engine off with the hybrid system than it would be to rely on a rather recalcitrant mechanical reverse gear, but no one seems to have gone that direction yet. So I mean, I think when you see how much these regs have changed for 2022 and how much they're thinking about 2026, and you think of all these other things, you think, well, actually, maybe we're now in a place where this wish list gets met at the end of the regulations, rather than ideas coming up and then being thrown at the wayside when it kind of comes down to the crunch moment when the rules are actually being written. So, I'm kind of optimistic some of this stuff will get sorted out in the fullness of time.
But not yet.
It physically can't, there's some of those things that just, it's just completely impractical, if not technically impossible.
Is that a regulatory thing that the crankshaft is attached to the hybrid part of the system?
I don't believe it is. I mean, I know Ferrari initially had their MGUK on the other side of the engine, and I was never entirely clear how they did the gearing. But it wouldn't be difficult for the regulations to either enforce or to allow the teams to have the MGUK as part of the gearbox. And in fact, theoretically, you could get rid of the clutch and just have like, I'm trying to think of the Koenigsegg. You could have a mechanical setup there that does away with the clutch completely, so the cars pull away on electric power at the race start or something like that. So there are ways and means. It's just the way these cars have been put together, almost with an archaic architecture in some respects, because it kind of works. It's legacy stuff. So the teams could do it if they felt that there was a reason to do so.
Sorry, Chris, I thought you were going to say something else then.
No, I think I'm all geeked out when it comes to the hybrid system.
Lee, you've been massively quiet tonight. Are you actually still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just listening tonight.
Absorbing.
I know obviously things are going to change massively when we get to the next test and teams have got new bits bolted on. But from the first shakedown, which team do you think looked in the best shape?
Oh, that's a tricky question, that one. And the problem you have with testing is it's testing. The teams aren't going out there necessarily to set the fastest laps. Certainly looking at the fastest lap times is a pointless endeavor. Looking at the long run times is a bit more interesting, but still, you don't know the fuel level, the tires, the engine. Alpine, because of technical reasons, weren't running DRS through the shakedown. So it's very hard to predict. I've not been trackside, and obviously I've not seen a lot of the TV footage from the Shakedown to really kind of get a feel. The best I can give people is that as I said earlier, the general order that you had from previous seasons looks like you're still going to have your Mercedes, Red Bull, with Ferrari and McLaren right on their tails, if not in amongst them. Every year we look at Mercedes and you think, are they sandbagging or have they actually got a problem? And most of the time it turns out that they were sandbagging, or if they had a technical problem, they got it sorted pretty rapidly. And they were quite open a few years ago, I think, on one of their podcasts, on one of the F1 podcasts. They said that the reason the car was so bad during testing is that their setup bar meant that the suspension geometry wasn't accurate. And they were really off the pace. But when they actually set the car up properly with a new straight setup beam, the car was great again. Equally, we look at Ferrari every year and it's either, oh God, it's another disaster, which tends to be quite accurate when they are going that way. And then other times when they put good times in, we all jump on the hype train and think, finally, Ferrari are back at race wins. And I think this year is another one of those examples that Ferrari are looking good, but this is only testing. Mercedes are good. We know that their car is, only a 12.5 rather than a 13. And there's big changes to come. Red Bull, people are saying that they were sandbagging. And then equally, some people are saying that, maybe they're not looking as good as they are. And then you look to the midfield and it's very hard to predict. Alpine had a pretty dreadful test. Haas and Alpha both had quite bad tests. So, I don't think Williams really kind of showed any evidence of, that radical design that I got so excited about when I first saw it in terms of it translating into lap times. So it's really hard to predict. I think there's the other thing, like we said earlier, is that no one seems to have got it drastically wrong, that they're really going to kind of fall away from, wherever they were last year. So, I think we'd need to have that conversation again at the end of this test to see if there are, some specific problems with certain teams in terms of reliability, in terms of not bringing the updates that we were expecting, in terms of them having, that lap time. So, I wish I could give you more, but all I can say is that the general competitiveness of what would potentially be a top four and the midfield and the tail enders means that it should be a pretty exciting year on track, especially if these cars can follow as the regulations have been promising.
Sorry, we lost you for a second there, Craig. It's I think the software keeps glitching out, but we got all of it because you come back and you speed up at the end of it. It's very strange. The joys of remote recording. COVID, what have you taught us?
Indeed. So do you think the regulation changes have had the desired effect? I mean, we saw cars following each other deliberately on purpose. Was it Gasly who tried following an Alpine for a little
there was
while?
a few drivers made comments. Again, I'm obviously an advocate of these regulations. I think that they were the right sort of changes for the right reasons, executed in a proper, diligent engineering fashion. So, I'm looking for confirmation bias from the drivers' comments. But some of the negative comments were that there is a spot when you're about, I think it was the second and a half. I think it might have been Charles Leclerc that might have said, or was it Gasly? I can't remember now. So there was a point when you're a little bit further behind the car where it doesn't seem to quite work. And then as you do get quite close to the car, it does seem to be working. So there is, a little bit of variance in what the drivers are saying. The only way we'd really know is when they're really going for it in a race, because that is the real test. I think, the physics, the fact that no one's come out with any outlandish loopholes in these regulations means that it should improve. Now, how much improvement in terms of what you're expecting to see is going to be down to every individual fan. I don't think we're going to see cars swapping places like MotoGP bikes, certainly like Moto3 bikes through a race. I don't think we're going to see that. I think, when someone is able to edge up to someone, it does allow them to stay close to them to make that maneuver. And with the change in the tyres, which is the other factor here, is that these tyres will slide now without massively overheating. And again, I think Charles Leclerc was saying that, you know, these tyres are so much better to race with. You can throw the car around a lot more, even if that's not great for the car's aerodynamics, but certainly the tyres will cope with it. That, you know, we should see a bit more, you know, people attempting to pass when they're close to someone rather than just lap after lap, never being quite close enough. DRS obviously is back again this year, which a lot of people saw as a very negative thing. And I can kind of agree with it. It'd be great if we didn't need it, but IndyCar has kind of borne this out as well. When you try and improve the wake of a car, which is what these regulations are all about, getting all that dirty air away, that dirty air when you're on a straight is what you slipstream in. So by getting rid of the dirty air, you're also getting rid of the slipstream. So DRS is still needed just to give you that little push along the straight, which you know, is absent now. Hopefully, we're not going to have the situation where the DRS effect is so powerful that you know, it doesn't matter if you're following someone closer; you'll just whiz by them. So hopefully, we'll see some shorter DRS zones, and you know, the overtake is much more about getting close to the car, coming onto a straight or going into a corner, rather than just literally drafting past on the straights. Which, you know, I've always been a critic of DRS, and certainly how much DRS you're available if you're just behind a car for an entire race just doesn't seem fair somehow. So I'm confident that, you know, when cars are able to be close to each other, it should give us something that we've been lacking for quite a few years.
Yeah, I was going to say about the slipstreaming thing. It seems, you know, we've got used to slipstreaming being a thing in Formula One so often. How much is it going to take away from, you know, the actual slipstream effect? Because obviously DRS is designed to get you closer. It's not supposed to be a free pass, of course, as you say. That's a little bit contentious. But yeah, I mean, I can even think back to the 90s, a huge slipstreaming, David Coulthard slipstreaming Michael Schumacher at Suzuka from like miles back. You know, just for me, it's always been a part of Formula One. Is it still a part, or has it completely disappeared?
Again, it's one of those things that we need to see out on track how effective it is. When you see the figures from the FIA in terms of the how small the downforce reduction is when behind another car, particularly as you get quite close to it, which is, you know, it's reduced only by a few percent. The flip side of that is equally the slipstream is lost by, you know, the inverse amount there. So yeah, I mean, I think it will be tricky. You know, there will still be a slipstream effect. You know, there's definitely going to be something there. I think, you know, DRS is just going to need to be there just to give it a little helping hand sometimes. But, you know, it's all part of a racing driver's armory. You know, potentially, you know, the same with the ability to follow the car. The way the aerodynamics work is actually, if you offset your car slightly from the car ahead of you, so rather than being kind of nose to tail, your nose is nearer their rear tire, or even offset a bit further from it, your aerodynamics are going to work even better through corners. So there's no point just following someone because you're in their wake. But if you just offset by even just a few feet, your aerodynamics will start to work so much better again. So there's a whole heap of things for the drivers to learn again with these cars and how you race them. Not least because you've got the tyres to play about with, you've got managing the brakes, but also the fact that the suspension doesn't work as well as it used to. You know, you're going to have the drivers, you know, trying to manage the aero of the cars over curbs. You know, in corners, you know, you can't get lots of roll in these cars because you know, it could upset the aero balance. Equally, you don't want the cars pitching under acceleration and braking, because that again equally can negatively affect the aero. Can actually also, in some situations, improve the aero. So, you know, every team and every driver is going to have a little way of just learning how to get the best out of this new package. Some drivers, I think, will cope with it. I think there may be some drivers that don't. Too early to predict at this stage, but you know, I think there's a lot of learning, and I think a lot of drivers, you know, I think what's great about this year is you'll have teams developing at different rates, solving problems, at different times, and then you've got the drivers doing exactly the same thing. Potentially quite an inconsistent season. So who's great in the first few races may not be, the mid-season. It might not be the same at the end of the season. It could be quite hard to predict. You could have a, like Mercedes had last year, a late surge from what looked like a lost season. And I think that's very much the kind of year that we could potentially look forward to this year.
Development race.
Yeah, both driver and team, which is slightly more unusual. You only tend to get that when you get big changes in the tyre construction. But this year you've kind of got everything changed for the driver. So it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be interesting how that the mainstream media kind of get this information out of the drivers, because obviously there's things there that they may want to. They're having problems to keep quiet, and equally if they find solutions, they want to keep quiet. So I have to find ways of just kind of getting this info out of them somehow.
Is there anything sort of glaring at you like that we might find as being the sort of the next big controversy, like flexi wings and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it will be flexible floors is going to be a big story. There's still scope to flex the rear wing. It's tightened up quite cleverly this year. There's a couple of other regulations which have kind of gone under the radar. One of the things on flexible aero, we've always talked about these flex tests, about pulling wings back and up and down and all this stuff. There's also a wing skin test. So there is the potential that the skin of the wing could either blow up at speed or shrink at speed or change its shape slightly. They're now actually testing the deflection of the skin of the wings, which does make you think, well, why is that coming now? Who's been doing that over the past few years? So yes, I think that's definitely going to be one of these things that gets talked about. The front wings are enormous. They look quite heavy. We've seen from some of the onboard footage already that they're bouncing and flexing like mad. Whether that's a design thing or if it is, just the problems of creating such a large wing and keeping it stiff could be something else to be discussed. So say brake management is going to be another thing. And one of the other tools that the FIA have got this year in a similar vein is again, it blew up again last year, but it's been a long-standing thing about, minimum tyre pressure, minimum tyre temperatures. And, you have to take the tyres out the blankets, no more than 30 seconds before you leave the garage. And how do you heat them up and how do you play about with this? And that was, we recall that was a big story last year. For the first time, the FIA have now got a homologated tyre temperature and pressure system built into every wheel. So if anyone is playing with low pressures or playing about with the temperature to muck about with the tyre pressures, that will all get picked up now. And, in a year where getting used to new tyres, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually get some race results, some qualifying results or some fines meted out because, sorry, but your tyre was under pressure through that race or through that qualifying lap. And I think it's got scope to get quite nasty amongst people. And certainly I think the fans may not react well, a bit like the 0.1 of a millimeter on the DRS late last year. Is why have I lost pole position because I'm half a degree too cold on my tyres? Again, it's something that could blow up and be quite a big story this year. And there's a number of other things across the car that potentially could blow up. So I think it will be a year of technical controversy, I feel.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back on F1 Twitter.
I think the old F1 Twitter and social media is going to be quite nasty this year because I think a lot of people have still got scores to settle, shall we say?
Just
and
a
aren't letting
tad.
things go.
Yes. I'm just interested to know if Ferrari end up being title contenders, how many complaints are going to be lodged after the first race to check their engine.
Many.
Well, I mean, you can see it already, can't you? I mean, a lot of the rhetoric coming out of some other team managers. Oh yeah, they've got a really powerful engine this year. Oh yeah, they're definitely going to be. Yeah, you just know that everyone's kind of getting in their arguments early about Ferrari as one option. But equally, I mean, like most of us that have been in the sport for quite, or followed this sport for quite a while, there's always the impression that the FIA are favouring one team over another, and it used to be Ferrari. I think certainly at the back end of last year it was Red Bull, but I think there was a stronger period of Red Bull influence over the FIA.
This means you're going to have to quit Twitter now, Craig. You do realise this?
Yes.
but
I'm just saying that it would appear. I'm not saying that there was or there wasn't. And, I think when people think that there was, it was probably more likely that it wasn't. But there was a time before that when it was, and it goes on and on.
All people can hear is Craig Scarborough says Max Verstappen, unworthy world champion. That's all people heard then.
Is it? I actually thought it was the opposite when I was saying that, thinking, oh, God.
And Chris,
yes,
you're not allowed to quit Twitter, because what would Nick Knowles do without the surreal pictures that you reply to him with?
This is true.
Has he not blocked you yet?
Yes.
No, he hasn't blocked me yet. No, but I do find DIY SOS Man a strange vigilante for Lewis Hamilton's title reversal of 2021.
Well, they're looking for race stewards, aren't they? He could be one of the two new race stewards. Who knows?
I think he's a bit too biased. I'm just going to put that out there now.
Oh, you can't say that.
Not so biased that he owns a Honda dealership in Jersey like Derek Warwick.
Does he really?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. There we
no.
go.
So it's all misinformation. I see. Put people off the scent. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that Formula One kind of has long since thrived on controversy, and certainly aspects of the regulation of the sport, both on the technical and the sporting side, have been prone to what's the right word? I have to be very careful with the word. Prone to interpretation in different ways by different people at different times. I think most people that, as I say, think that there is some kind of, ingrained bias at any one point to one team or another I think that's quite wide of the mark. But I think, it's the inconsistency that's the problem. And you'll get half of F1 Twitter going, oh, but they're favouring this person. And the other half will be going, oh, but they're favouring that person. Which probably means that they're doing a pretty good job at the end of it. So, but I think, that is definitely an area that needs to improve in the sport. And I think we're starting to see movement towards maybe a bit more transparency in that area. I think it's certainly improved over previous years, but, there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I mean, we're going into this season with two new race directors. One of which comes from WEC, where he has that much respect amongst all the teams and the drivers that no one dare argue with him or persuade him too much. And by all accounts, the new regulations are that there is now a set procedure for how teams can contact race direction and the stewards.
Yes.
And it's not just the what do we say, open hotline.
Well, this is it. I mean, that line has existed for years. I mean, we've always seen the team principals and team personnel on the pit wall pushing the Charlie button, or it became the Michael button, or what have you. And we've never heard what those conversations were. So if you consider what we heard last year was kind of a revelation and kind of got worse as the year got on. What was it like before when they knew it wasn't being broadcast at all? I mean, the mind boggles, doesn't it? What was said and how were things dealt with? I think that it's good that it has been opened up. I can remember hearing some of the first ones and doing commentary and thinking, oh my God, they're doing this. They're allowed to tell us this stuff. So I mean, hopefully that the level it got to late last year, for good and bad reasons, needs to be sorted out. And again, it's just, I think they're trying things to try and improve things, and these may not be the solutions, but you don't improve anything by without changing it. So we'll give them some time and space to do so, and hopefully that will bring fans Well, I don't think you're going to get all of the fans kind of believing in everything is, completely clean and above board, because I don't think the world is just like that on social media. But I think certainly most fans will see that, most of these decisions are made with a good heart and goodwill. So we just need to get everyone's confidence back in it.
Yeah, I mean, Formula One did take a little bit of a knock after Abu Dhabi. We'll say being diplomatic. I just want this season to be wiped the slate clean. Let's just go again.
Exactly.
It should have been that the day after, shouldn't it? But it wasn't.
I think we've still got a few weeks of it yet, at least.
It would have been without the internet. Then again, we wouldn't have been here. So
yeah,
exactly.
I mean, I was thinking about this the other day as well. Like as soon as the cars turn a wheel in anger in Bahrain in just under 2 weeks now, that's going to be the first time since that incident that all the cars will be on the track together. And obviously, they're totally different, but. It's strange to think that was the last piece of actual Formula One racing, was that thing. I don't like to refer to it too often because many reasons.
The event, remain indoors.
The event, yeah. So until that moment, I can understand why there might be debate or whatever. But as soon as those lights go out and first lap begins in Bahrain. It's all gone. Concentrate on 2022. Just exactly what all the teams and especially the drivers will be doing. So, I think it's pointless to let it rumble on.
Yeah, you just get the feeling that there is an element of the media and the social media as well that will say if X driver does well over Y driver. At the end of the first race, it's like they've got revenge. It's going to be all of this sort of stuff, isn't it? So I think there's people that won't let it go, and maybe that is why they introduced the technical show and tell in Formula One rather than getting journalists in front of the drivers asking the same old inane questions race after race. But that's only my opinion anyway.
Yeah.
Right, Lee, I'm gonna ask the question because you haven't had any recently, but has anyone sent a shunt in?
No, because we said we weren't going to do it anymore.
Well, no, because people have been asking me if we were doing shunts. And
They're asking the wrong person
I
there,
know.
then, aren't they? That's what's happened.
So someone sent me some.
No, the total shunt is retired now.
Which is a shame. We will bring it back at some point. We need to find something new for the end of the show. I think we're having planning meetings while we're doing this.
I have just briefly come across one other bit of news while having a scroll.
Oh, there is news.
According to Automotor and Sport, Haas had an issue with their plane today.
They
and
did, yeah.
may or may not get to the test on time.
Yeah, the plane
very, very
broke
Haas
down.
style.
The plane carrying Haas's stuff broke down in Istanbul, was not able to take off. And obviously... not that there's a problem in the direct route from Istanbul to Abu Dhabi. What am I talking about? To Bahrain. But the obviously the air traffic around that area at the moment is particularly heavier than normal. So they're having to wait longer to find a new slot. So they might not have all of their stuff with them by the time the first test starts.
Is there anything else that can go wrong with that team?
I do genuinely feel quite sorry for Haas.
They come out with a new car. The wheels fall off at the first pit stop when they're in danger of getting a double points finish. They've had two sponsors who have had differing kinds of controversies. They're a driver short already, and we've not even started the season. And is there anything else that can happen like that? Didn't they have an issue with transport at one point last season as well?
I think there was something going on at some point last year. I can't really remember. I don't know if it was Haas specifically or just.
There was a number of
freight
teams, wasn't there? Wasn't that one of the last races of the season? Saudi Arabia, I want to say.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah.
A lot of teams didn't get their stuff in time, but they just cracked on anyway.
Yeah, didn't they have to lift the curfew just so that they could
That
actually
does
get the
ring a
cars
bell
built?
now,
Like
yeah.
Borrow bits of kit and things. I mean, I think it depends really what was on that plane, because don't forget they're going to test with a single car, and they don't need everything to do the test. Obviously, in time for the race, then they will need, the second car, all the other bits of kit, all the other things that get flown out for the non-racing activities, all the marketing and the hospitality and stuff. So it depends what's actually in the containers. It could literally just be, all the free gifts for their paddock club guests. It could be something as simple as that, or it could be all of their uniform without certain branding on it. So,
or it could be the rolls of masking tape to put over the branding on the current uniforms.
Exactly, yeah, just lots of white duct tape. So I think you'd be surprised how little kit that a team could get away with to start testing. When you see them when they do their shakedowns, they're operating out of a small garage. You don't have to have everything there. So I think there is the potential that this is just, one of those glitches that happens. I'd be surprised if it has any material effect on their testing. And from where they are, they've probably got far bigger things to be worrying about than maybe starting a little bit late on the first day of the test.
Yeah, I think as Gunter said in an interview this week, it's just a bigger negative number.
Poor Gunter.
Apparently, in Drive to Survive, there is another Gunter episode.
I mean, it's a tradition.
Well, there
now,
has to be. He's a legend in Formula One now. It's funny how it comes across, and someone that you've known for quite a few years, suddenly portrayed in a very specific way, and it's like, oh, I don't remember him quite being like that, but maybe he was, and it's like.
You've obviously just not
it.
irked him like a Kevin Magnussen.
Maybe he just doesn't swear at me as much as he does at his drivers. I don't know.
Have you not read the quote? The quote from what he said to Mazepin during Drive to Survive. He's talking to him.
I've got to say, I've fast forward through so much of Drive to Survive. I probably haven't heard that particular bit.
No, it was a quote from this, like the new series. And he's talking to him about giving the mechanics a hard time about the car not being very good. And the quote is, "This is why everyone fucking hates you."
Oh,
It's a bit harsh, but
yeah. I mean, allegedly, season 4, episode 4 is focusing on Nikita Mazepin. And
that might not have aged well then, that edit.
No. It's based around the Russian Grand Prix as well.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've got a season 4, episode 4 anymore. I don't know.
This is going to be the most watched episode in the history of Netflix.
If it's part of the series, obviously you can't deny the fact that 2021 was last year. It was a thing that happened. You can't just delete things.
I don't know. The Lewis fans have theories about just deleting what happened last year.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they do.
It's true. And if nobody else will do it, they will do it themselves.
I read.
You could DIY if you wanted to.
I read it might be getting dropped.
What, the Russian Grand Prix?
No Drive to Survive.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think they were saying that it won't be around forever. I think was sort of the gist of it, which you could say about anything, really, couldn't you?
It was direct from Domenicali, wasn't it? That they said that it was, we will put this out to tender at some point. Doesn't necessarily mean you've got the Netflix has got the stranglehold on it. I quite enjoy Drive to Survive. I know that it's it's a bit contrived. It's it's dramatic where it doesn't need to be. It makes it borrows radio message. For those who don't know, it borrows radio messages from other races and implements them into other footage to make fake commentary, etc., to make it sound and look a bit more dramatic than it was. Or make it sound like a driver said something that they didn't actually say at that time. So yeah, but it's it is about the sport that we all love. So I do watch it, but I watch it with a pinch of salt. No, that's I take it with a pinch of salt whilst I watch it.
I'd like them to do something like that, but as like a hybrid form between Drive to Survive and a season review. So Drive to Survive would have 23 episodes this year, but have it more based. I mean, you can like have a bit of creative editing if you want, but not putting things into races where it just wasn't there to make it seem more dramatic. I think that it'd be a really cool way of doing a season review, is having like an hour, 45 minutes or something on each race.
Yeah, I mean the thing that frustrates me with sort of Drive to Survive and in general F1 pre-show shows is that why does this all go into Drive to Survive? It's happening at a race weekend with cameramen everywhere. Why isn't this in your Sky pre-show or in your post-race show? Why aren't we seeing more of what's actually going on in the paddock? Because it's got so tight now that you literally can't speak to anybody in the paddock, on the grid, without getting things booked in at the beginning of the year and stuff like this. And the whole paddock is so uptight and so controlled that you can't actually get very good TV out of most of what's going on, despite the fact that it is, as Drive to Survive has shown, it's a fascinating place to be. So I just think, the sport needs to open up and relax a bit, and let's have Sky following Nikita Mazepin around for the Russian Grand Prix instead of Drive to Survive, and have it going out, during the race weekend, rather than it always having to be, Martin Brundle has booked, so and such drive to speak on the grid, and we'll have Christian Horner live on the pit wall this weekend. I mean, that's not massively entertaining, but this is all going on, and it should be captured in the TV broadcasts, not in a documentary format. That's how I see it.
100%. But if we did that, we wouldn't have time to have like drivers playing Crown Green Bowls in the pit lane.
Well, maybe that needs to go into its own sports show and have its own channel. Driver darts.
I mean, a Grand Prix weekend
with Johnny Herbert throwing baps across a bakery at Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc,
and at least two of them going for a coffee in a local restaurant.
Of course.
And fumbling the local language.
I wonder where that was going for a moment.
How would we cope without those features?
These are all reasons why Lee turns the television on 20 minutes before the race starts.
It's not a controversial technique that I think coming in later is sometimes better.
Yeah. Well, it was a proper like revelation to me when Fernando did like Indianapolis, because I don't normally watch IndyCar. So I was watching then to see how Fernando got on. I'm watching like the pre-race build-up for IndyCar. Even though they were just in a studio, it was like, oh shit! All they do is talk about IndyCar. This is odd.
How dare they?
I mean, going back to Drive to Survive. I mean, what it has done brilliantly is put a load of young new eyes on Formula One. Some of whom probably listen to this podcast.
That is undeniable, definitely.
If they transfer, though, that's the other thing. If you get people that are in it because it's essentially made in Chelsea with racing cars, that
I was going to say Hollyoaks, but that works.
But that it might not actually transfer to people that are willing to sit down for an hour and a half and watch a motor race.
I think you will get people that don't convert over and just treat it as a box set like anything else. But my experience I've been into motor racing since I was, sort of like 10 years old. No one in my family was. None of my friends, none of my even work colleagues over the years. Very few of people have actually been into it. But it's only been in the last few years people have sort of come up to me and says, "Oh, my son and daughter are watching it now, and like my wife watches it," and it's like, really? And it's because they've watched Drive to Survive, and they will now sit and watch the Grand Prix. We were at a friend's birthday meal, and some of the kids were watching qualifying on their phones. And it's like,
Wow.
I've never experienced this before. I mean, it was always like my little kind of secret thing that I would be watching the motor racing. But now, yeah, people that you, well, maybe only into football or, other interests are actually getting into Formula One because of Drive to Survive. So, as much as I
That's
say
cool.
that it's, it's not the perfect format, it has a job. I think it's the grabbing the essence of that and putting it in other places, I think is the key thing as well.
I've had a lot of this when when I go to work on a Monday, that now I'll have the women coming and asking me about F1, not just the lads.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
does
no, absolutely.
appeal to a different audience, and we're probably not the target audience for it because we're a bit too into it, but it does seem to have broadened out who's interested.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the diversity of the F1 sort of fan base now, with Drive to Survive, with Lewis, obviously with the Black Lives Matter sort of thing going on over the past couple of years, I think you can see how diverse it is, particularly on social media, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, it's always been an international sport. It's definitely got a much bigger foothold in the US. I mean, that's more than evident. And it would be good to kind of monopolize a bit on that, and keep expanding the sport into different areas and different groups of people to watch it and follow it, and hope that they aren't just interested in it because of a particular driver or a particular TV show. I think it would be good that we can grow the base of the sport into far wider, as you say. I mean, I think social media taught me that there's way more women that are into Formula One than I ever believed, because I before that I couldn't think of many women that I knew that actually liked the sport. But actually, probably more predominantly on social media, it is a female following, and it just shows you how important that has been.
On a not unrelated subject, while Christian Horner's going on about women only watching F1 because they fancy the drivers, the only person I know who fancies Max Verstappen is my hairdresser, and he's called Liam.
There's nothing more you can say after that, is there? Wow.
That could be the name of the podcast episode, isn't it?
I got that into 255 characters easily
Season
enough.
preview, that's too dry.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Well, Craig, thank you so much for joining us again this week. Like I said at the start,
Good fun as ever.
It wouldn't be the start of the season without you.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll join us again later on in the year, so we can look at what development, if any, has been done and actually been legal.
Yeah, let's see what some of my predictions and concerns were like. Or maybe Haas will just run away with the championship this year.
You heard it here first. And probably last. If you want to get in touch with us, obviously we've got the website at threelegs4wheels.com, and we're at 3legs4wheels on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and individually we all are
At Sean Cowper.
At Flood21.
At It All Shunt.
at Pablo100, and
at Scarbs Tech.
great. And also, if you want to support the show, if you don't already, we've got the Patreon page set up. You can donate as little as $1, £1 or €1 a month, and you'll get early access to the show, and we will come up with some new benefits this year, because New Year we're going to get around to doing something for the patrons who have...
New Year, it's March.
Well, no, new season. It's our New Year. You're an NFL...
New year of Formula One.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're an NFL fan. The league year doesn't start until the 16th of this month.
True.
So yeah, I can get away with saying it. So we will come up with some more new benefits for the patrons at some point soon. We will have to get our heads together, possibly over a pint. We will be back next week. We'll be able to look back at what happened during testing and see what we can pick out of that. If anyone's on Discord, look for the 3 Legs 4 Wheels server, because there'll be chat going on all over testing Thursday, Friday, and Saturday on that. And other than that, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.